Alan Mercer had sworn he would never step foot inside a hospital again, not after what happened with Danielle, not after the guilt had eaten away at him like rust on steel. But Harrington Memorial wasn't just any hospital. It had been shut down for years. It was a dead place, silent, forgotten, and now it was scheduled for demolition. The security company offered him a temporary night shift gig, just for a few weeks, until the crews came in to tear the place apart. The pay was decent, and at 62, Alan didn't have many options. His savings were thin, his pension was tighter, and he was just grateful to be working. Still, something inside him hesitated when he saw the assignment, Harrington Memorial. He didn't say anything to the supervisor, just nodded and took the badge. The first night was quiet, unnervingly so. The hospital sat like a tomb on the edge of town, overgrown and nearly swallowed by trees. Inside, it was like the place had been abandoned mid-breath. Chairs were still tucked neatly under nurse stations. Clipboards lay on counters, yellowed by time. Patient beds remained made with stiff, faded sheets. Everything was covered in dust, but the shape of the hospital's old life remained intact, like a memory that refused to fade. He started his rounds with a flashlight in one hand and an old walkie in the other. Most of the cameras were dead, but a few still worked grainy black and white feeds from key areas. The main entrance, the operating wing, and basement level 2. That last one, Alan avoided watching it too long. The picture would glitch every so often, just enough to suggest movement, or a shadow that hadn't been there a second ago. By the third night, something changed. Every time Alan walked past the morgue, he found the door slightly open. Not wide, just enough to make him stop, 3 inches, like someone had pushed it open and paused. He would close it, lock it, double-check the latch, and continue on his round. But when he circled back, it would be open again. He told himself it was the air, old hinges, maybe a shift in pressure. The hospital was ancient. Places like that breathe on their own after a while. Still, it unsettled him, especially when he found a smear of what looked like a fingerprint on the inside handle. Human, greasy, fresh. On the 5th night, Alan brought tape. Just a strip from the office drawer. After locking the morgue door, he placed it across the seam, pressing it down tight. He checked it twice that hour intact. On the 3rd trip past, the tape was split perfectly down the middle, as if sliced by a scalpel. The door was cracked open again. He stared into the darkness beyond and felt the weight of memory press against his chest. The morgue had always haunted him. Not just in this place, but everywhere. Ever since Danielle. He had been a paramedic then, 10 years ago. The call came in just after midnight, a suspected overdose behind a nightclub. They found her half-conscious, pale, fighting to breathe. She was young, 19. She woke up screaming, clawing at him, disoriented, terrified. Alan did what protocol demanded, restrained her wrists and secured her for transport. She kept screaming, kept thrashing. Something in him tired, overworked, maybe careless, snapped. He stepped out of the ambulance for a breather. Just 10 minutes. When he came back, she had choked herself on the strap, dead by the time they reached the hospital. Danielle was admitted to Harrington Memorial. Alan quit 2 weeks later. Now, years later, here he was guarding the ruins of her final resting place. On the 7th night, the camera for basement level 2 went completely black at 3:15 a.m. in static. Just blackness. When it returned a few seconds later, Alan leaned in, frowning. There was someone standing at the end of the hallway. Thin, pale, wearing what looked like a hospital gown. Their head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and their arms hung stiff at their sides. The image flickered, and they were gone. Alan grabbed his flashlight and walked down the stairs. The morgue door was wide open this time. The air inside was ice cold, so cold his breath puffed out in pale clouds. The flashlight beam shook slightly in his hand as he stepped in. The morgue drawers lined the walls like metal coffins. One drawer was half pulled out, just enough to reveal the etched name scratched into the steel. Alan Mercer, his legs weakened. No, he whispered. There was no way. No one knew he was here. He used a fake last name on the badge. No one was supposed to know. He backed away, tripping over his own boots, stumbling out into the hall, and saw it. A gurney at the end of the corridor. Black body bag on top, perfectly still, then it moved. Just a twitch, then a ripple. Then the whole bag began to convulse violently, as if something inside was thrashing to get out. The zipper began to slide downward. Alan turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the security office. He slammed the door shut and locked it, hand shaking. The camera for basement level 2 flickered back on. There was movement again. A slow, deliberate shadow stepping into frame. Then clearer, a woman, hospital gown, long wet hair. She stared directly into the camera and mouthed something. Alan leaned forward, terrified, unable to look away. The feed crackled with sound. 10 minutes. He recoiled. Danielle. Her face was pale, drained, and stretched into something almost monstrous. Her mouth hung open too wide. Her eyes were pits. But her voice, he knew her voice. "You left me," she whispered, this time louder, as if in the room with him. "Now I'll never leave." Behind him, the office door handle began to turn on its own. Alan didn't look. He bolted through the emergency stairwell, flying upward only to find every floor had changed. There were no stair signs, no labels, no windows. Every hallway looked the same. No matter which door he opened, it led him back to the morgue. He burst into the room, but it wasn't the same anymore. It looked newer, functioning. Bright fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Stainless steel glinted under his feet. Monitors blinked. Heart rate machines beeped. And on the central slab lay himself, strapped down, dead. As he watched, his body sat up and looked at him, eyes filled with black fluid. "You should have stayed outside," it said. Alan screamed. The lights exploded, raining sparks. Darkness swallowed everything, then silence. He awoke on the floor just outside the hospital, soaked in sweat, shivering. It was dawn. His car was parked where he left it. The security badge was still clipped to his chest. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare? Then he saw it. A small, cold metal tag now clasped tightly around his wrist. Harrington Memorial Patient number 0273 Mercer. He tore it off and threw it into the bushes. He didn't go back. He never even picked up his last paycheck. The security company assumed he had quit. 1 week later, a new guard took the night shift. His name was Chris Dempsey. Early 30s, confident, practical. On his first night, the supervisor gave him the usual speech. Stay out of the lower levels, especially the morgue. Chris chuckled. "Why? Ghosts?" The supervisor didn't laugh. "Let's just say the morgue door never stays shut." That night, at exactly 3:15 a.m., the basement level 2 feed blinked out. When it came back, the camera showed Chris standing at the end of the hallway, staring at the open morgue. Behind him, a drawer slid out slowly. Inside, etched freshly into the metal, was a name, Chris Dempsey, and in the corner of the frame, a woman in a hospital gown smiled. The hospital stood quiet behind a rusted gate, its cracked windows like dead eyes staring across the overgrown lawn. St. Aurel's Memorial had been closed for nearly 50 years, abandoned after a fire destroyed part of its east wing. Time had worn the building down, but its bones remained strong, heavy with silence and secrets. Mura was one of 6 student volunteers sent to help clean it before the building became a medical museum. She was excited, driven by her interest in medicine and the forgotten spaces where history lingered. Most saw it as a dull assignment, but to Mara, it was a rare opportunity. The first day passed uneventfully. They were assigned wings to organize, mostly sorting files and cleaning unused equipment. Dust coated everything like a second skin, and the smell of mildew drifted from every corner. Still, Mara enjoyed the quiet and the sense of purpose. On the second day, while moving a cabinet near the eastern wing, Mara found something strange. Behind it, almost hidden, was a narrow corridor. It was not on the map she had been given. The hallway seemed untouched by time, darker than the rest of the building. She stepped in, heart fluttering as she walked slowly down the cold, quiet corridor. The lights above flickered weakly, humming like distant insects. At the end of the hallway was a door with peeling gray paint and no markings. Just the number 6 etched faintly above the frame. Beyond the door was a small ward with 6 rooms, each perfectly preserved. The beds still had sheets, and leather restraints hung from the sides. Journals lay on the tables near the beds, covered in dust but unbroken by time. Mara entered one room and opened the journal inside. The pages described a patient who reacted violently to therapy and claimed to hear voices in the mirrors. The entries grew more frantic, describing strange behavior and sensations that didn't belong to the patient alone. In another room, she found a journal that spoke of shadows that moved on their own and whispers that knew the staff's secrets. One entry mentioned hearing footsteps in the ceiling and seeing faces appear in the walls. She began to feel the air grow colder as she read. She left the ward shaken but said nothing to the others. The hallway had vanished when she returned the next morning. The cabinet stood exactly where it had been, the wall behind it solid and smooth. There was no sign of a door, no sign of a corridor. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. At night, she dreamed of long halls filled with beds and people who stared at her without blinking. She began waking with scratches on her arms and dust on her shoes she didn't remember walking through. One morning, she returned to the hallway's location out of instinct. To her surprise, the cabinet was slightly moved, as if pushed from the inside. She slid it aside again, and the gray door was back. The corridor waited silently behind it. She stepped through and walked to room 6. The journal there looked newer than the others. It had no dust, and the pages were smooth. She opened it and froze when she saw her name at the top of the first page. The entries described her actions since entering the hospital. They labeled her a subject with a tendency to explore forbidden spaces. It said she was responding well to environmental influence and predicted full submission within a week. Mara dropped the journal and backed away slowly. The air in the room was dense, and the walls seemed to breathe around her. She turned and hurried down the hall, never looking back until she reached the safety of the main wing. That night, she tried to rest, but the whispers returned. She heard her own name coming from the corners of her room. The sound of pages turning echoed from her desk, though no one was there. Something had followed her home. She began to feel watched, even in daylight. Her reflection lingered too long in mirrors. Lights flickered when she entered rooms. She found the same words scribbled in her notebook over and over again, though she hadn't written them. The next day, the corridor was gone once more. She tried breaking through the wall behind the cabinet, but the plaster was thick and unmarked. She scratched at it with her nails until they bled. The others found her sitting on the floor, whispering to herself. They told her to rest. She was removed from the volunteer list and sent back to her apartment. She was told the stress of school and the atmosphere of the hospital had triggered something. But she knew better. Something in the hospital had noticed her. She stayed home, but the feeling didn't go away. At night, her walls creaked as if something was walking between them. She found damp footprints on her bathroom floor. Her own voice spoke to her through the radio, saying things she hadn't thought yet. 3 days later, a package arrived at her door. There was no return address and no delivery record. Inside was the journal from room 6, the same one with her name. A new entry had appeared at the end, written in fresh ink. It said she was ready. It said she would return soon. It said the word had been waiting for her to come home. That night, the door appeared in her apartment. It stood between her kitchen and hallway, gray paint peeling, slightly open. The inside glowed faintly with cold white light. She didn't fight it. She stepped through and disappeared without a sound. The next day, her apartment was empty. No one could explain how the locked door had been opened. Her phone, wallet, and keys were untouched. All they found was the journal, placed neatly on her bed. Inside was a single photo of her, lying strapped to a hospital bed in a dim room with cracked tiles. Her eyes were open, but no longer seeing. 6 months passed. The St. Uriel's Medical Museum opened to the public. The building was clean and full of exhibits. Visitors toured the surgery room, the old pharmacy, and the restored administration wing. But no one ever found Ward 6. It was not on any of the maps, not on any of the floor plans. The staff insisted it didn't exist. They said the building had been fully inspected. They said everything had been accounted for. One day, a child visiting the museum wandered away from his school group. When he returned, he was pale and quiet. He didn't speak for several minutes. Then he smiled and looked directly at his teacher. In a voice that wasn't his, he said something soft and slow. She had come home. Then he laughed, and the lights above them flickered once. The hospital stood like a corpse of memory, wrapped in ivy and silence, with broken windows that resembled open wounds. It had been shut down for nearly 3 decades, its final tragedy etched deep in urban legend. Locals called it cursed, but thrill seekers called it an invitation. That's what brought Lena here, her camera charged, flashlight ready, and her nerves tight with excitement. She had explored places before, ghost towns, storm tunnels, forgotten hotels. But this one felt different from the first step inside. The air was heavier than it should have been, even for a building sealed from the world. Her boots crunched on old glass as she made her way through the entrance lobby, once polished marble, now cracked and layered in dust. Peeling paint curled from the walls like dead skin. Rusted wheelchairs sat frozen in corners, some toppled, others still upright as if abandoned mid-push. The deeper she walked, the more she sensed something unseen, watching from just beyond her flashlight's reach. She brushed it off. This was part of the thrill. Graffiti stained the walls' names, symbols, warnings. Her steps echoed through the corridors, bouncing strangely, never sounding quite right. She passed old surgical wings, pediatric wards, and a locked psych unit before stopping at a rotted sign, burn treatment, East Wing. Her breath caught. This was the one. She remembered the story, a fire in the burn unit, ironic and tragic. An electrical spark from faulty wiring ignited oxygen tanks. The blaze consumed the patients, many still strapped to their beds. A young nurse reportedly stayed behind to save them. None made it out. Lena pressed forward, her boots leaving shallow imprints in the thick dust coating the floor. The hallway grew narrower, darker, as if trying to squeeze her back. Walls here were scorched, blackened with soot. Some doors hung crooked, revealing glimpses of melted bed frames and blistered walls. The air began to shift. A sharp smell like charred fabric and something sweet rotting clung to her skin. Her flashlight flickered once, then again. She hit it with her palm and kept going. The corridor bent in an odd angle, leading her into what had once been the main burn ward. The room opened up suddenly. Blackened tiles cracked underfoot, and metal bed frames were twisted like bones. A cluster of medical carts stood melted together, fused into one grotesque sculpture. Ash still clung to the ceiling. She raised her camera and snapped a few shots. Then she heard it. Faint at first, so faint she thought it was the wind through shattered glass. But then it came again, a long wailing cry that twisted into a scream. It rose from somewhere far ahead, too human to be the wind, too raw to be anything natural. Lena froze. Her heart pounded. She told herself it was probably another explorer, maybe someone else had come in after her. But the scream didn't sound like someone crying out for help. It sounded like suffering, endless and old. Her curiosity pushed her forward. She passed a broken gurney, scorched and rusted, and entered a side room that looked almost untouched. The bed here was still intact. On the pillow, dark stains bloomed like ancient shadows. Another scream echoed, closer this time. It dragged across the corridor like fingernails on stone. Lena turned around and paused. The hallway behind her was no longer the same. What had been a straight passage was now twisted angled like a funhouse mirror, with the walls closer together and the ceiling lower. Her flashlight trembled in her hand. A door on her left creaked open without touch. She stepped back instinctively. Behind it, darkness gaped. Then from within emerged a figure, a woman, her hospital gown singed, her hair half burnt, skin charred and glistening. Flames still danced along her arms, but they didn't consume her. Lena stumbled, unable to scream. The woman looked at her not with hatred, but with unbearable pain. Her lips moved, but no sound came. And yet, Lena heard her. "Help me." It wasn't spoken. It was felt. A scream burst from Lena's throat as the figure reached toward her. She turned and ran. Her boots slipped on debris and her flashlight clattered against her leg. She didn't care. She bolted into the corridor, but it wasn't the same corridor. The walls here pulsed faintly as if breathing. The floor was soft, spongy, coated in ash that stuck to her solace. She ran toward the stairwell, only to find it bricked over. There was no staircase, just a jagged wall that hadn't been there before. Her breathing grew shallow. She backtracked, trying to retrace her path, but every turn led her somewhere new. Every hallway looped. Each time she turned a corner, she found herself right back in the burn unit. The beds were melting again. The screams were louder. She saw flashes of faces, melted, weeping, silent in their agony. Their eyes followed her. Some crawled across the floor, dragging broken limbs. Her camera, long forgotten around her neck, snapped on its own. Click, click, click. Each flash lit up the room with ghastly clarity, revealing figures in the corner, on the ceiling, beneath the beds. They didn't move in the light, only in the dark. She found a door new, white, clean. With trembling hands, she opened it and ran inside, slamming it shut. The room was cold and sterile, untouched by fire. A clean bed sat in the center. On the nightstand was a clipboard with her name: Lena, age, blood type, date of admittance, today. She backed away as the fluorescent lights above flickered violently. A mirror on the wall revealed her face, blistered and burned, just like the others. Her hair sizzled at the ends. Her skin was starting to peel. But she felt no pain, just numbness. The door opened again, and the flaming nurse stepped in. This time, Lena didn't run. She tried, but her body didn't respond. The room stretched, bending in impossible ways, warping like heat over asphalt. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the walls. The next thing she knew, she was lying on one of the burned beds. Straps held her wrists and ankles. Her flashlight rolled across the floor beside her. The room was full of smoke. Shadows watched from the corners, whispering unintelligible things. Time stopped making sense. Minutes passed like hours, or maybe days. Every time she closed her eyes, she opened them in a different version of the same room. Sometimes she was the nurse. Sometimes she was a patient. Once she was the fire. One final time she broke free, or thought she did. She found a hallway that felt different, cleaner. The screams were gone. The air was clearer. She ran toward what looked like an exit sign glowing faintly in the dark, her chest filled with hope. But as she turned the final corner, she saw herself. Another girl, camera in hand, flashlight swinging. The same steps, the same path, the same excited face, just moments before the scream. Lena reached out, but her hand passed through the girl like smoke. She screamed, but the girl didn't hear. The girl stepped forward, repeating the cycle. The burn unit awaited her, and Lena faded into the walls, her scream joining the other's part of the chorus that haunted the East Wing. Now she waits there, not alive, not dead, just caught between. When the next explorer comes, they'll hear her "to help me" echoing softly through the smoke-choked halls. They'll think it's the wind, but it never is.